Welcome to Voice for Infection Prevention, where we explore the latest developments, challenges, and insights in the field of infection prevention and control. With a passion for promoting patient safety and healthcare excellence, we're excited to bring you engaging discussions with experts, leaders, and innovators in the field. So whether you're a seasoned professional or just beginning your journey in infection prevention, welcome to the conversation. This is Voice for Infection Prevention.
Welcome back to Voice for Infection Prevention. Today we're talking with an incredible leader in the field, Wendy Kaler, whose career journey has taken her from the microbiology lab to infection prevention leadership. Wendy started with a background in bacteriology and immunology, originally planning to become an epidemiologist. But after working closely with infection control teams and infectious disease specialists, she made the leap into infection prevention, bringing a strong, evidence-based approach to the field. In this interview, Wendy shares her experience in both academic medical centers and community hospitals, the importance of structured training and mentorship in infection prevention, and why infection preventionists need to be more than just infection trackers. They need to be change agents and strategic leaders in their organization. We also discuss the challenges infection preventionists face in gaining leadership support, how to advocate for proper resources, and why standardized competency-based training is essential for the future of the profession. If you're passionate about infection prevention, leadership, and the future of the field, this is an interview you don't want to miss. Let's dive in.
This episode is sponsored by Clutch Recruitment, the leading recruiting firm in the country, recruiting exclusively within infection prevention and control.
So, all right. So I like asking this question to really everybody that I get to talk to, just because I'm curious. But how did you discover infection prevention? It looks like you got a bachelor's degree in bacteriology and immunology. So how did you end up in a hospital working in a micro lab?
Yes. So when I was graduating from college, I realized there was an option for me to do a 1-year internship in a hospital, in a laboratory. And that if I did that, I could get a license to be able to be a medical technologist, which literally would just give me independence and be able to support myself. And that's how it started. And I did finish that internship. I loved the microbiology part of the laboratory the most. I knew I wanted to be a microbiologist. And so I became a microbiologist, and I worked in a small lab, and then I moved into a university laboratory setting. And I got to work with some really highly educated folks in that lab. I worked at a university hospital in San Diego, and met a lot of infectious disease specialists, physicians. I got to do rounds with them. And the infection control nurse at that time was really a lovely lady. And she was a nurse, and it was always the infection control nurse. I wasn't a nurse. I was a scientist. I looked at myself as a scientist, as a microbiologist. But she saw in me that I was curious and that I really wanted to know more than just be looking at my agar plates and naming organisms. And we would get into conversations about some of these patients because she'd be up on the floor and she knew the patients and she'd talk about the patients, and she brought me relevance to what I was doing. And this was back in the 70s, the late 70s, the early 80s. And I really saw that I wanted more than just being disconnected in the laboratory. When you're in the lab, it's such a silo. And some people really like that. And all of a sudden I realized my personality actually was bigger than that, than just enjoying my day of doing my work and going home, but then putting it away at the end of the day. So I had curiosity about these patients and their situations. And because I was working with infectious disease physicians who were professors, they often stopped by my bench and they would explain things to me that were so interesting that I did not learn as in my microbiology training. And so I knew there was more, and this wasn't going to be enough for me. So that's how I knew about infection prevention as a career.
Okay. And then it looks like you did that for 8 years, right? And then transitioned into an infection control coordinator position. Now, I'm curious. It looks like it's the same hospital system, at least, or is it a different hospital
Yeah, I
entirely?
moved, right. So what happened is when I decided that I wanted more, this is kind of where I was working would not allow me to go part-time so I could get my master's. I decided I wanted a master's in public health. And at that point, when I decided a master's in public health, it was that I wanted to do something more, but I wanted to do some type of a study. Thought I really wanted to be an epidemiologist. That's what really was exciting to me at that point. It wasn't to be an infection control practitioner that I decided to get my master's. It was that I really wanted to do epidemiology and solve some disease or something. I wanted something bigger. So I left where I was working to go to a facility, a hospital that would allow me part-time so I could work on my master's degree.
Gotcha. Okay. So your exposure to infection prevention, then, obviously you worked with some infectious disease physicians, but I guess, where and when did you decide that infection control was more of the path than the public health side?
Really? So that ended up happening when I was working after I'd finished my master's degree. And during the time that I'd been getting my master's degree, we did clerkships and internships, and I really wasn't that fascinated with infection control at that point. The people who were doing infection control, it wasn't what I thought was stimulating at first until I met some of the people in San Diego who were very involved in the field and really wanted to change the way we did infection prevention. So I was working as a microbiologist, and literally the infection prevention or control nurse came to me in the lab and said, Wendy, would you like a career change? And she said, we
Wow.
could really use somebody with a microbiology background and an MPH to round out our team. She was a nurse. And then our other team member was the infectious disease physician, our epidemiologist. And she said, we could really use your skill set to round out our team. Do you want to leave microbiology and join our infection control department?
I'm amazed because that's mid '90s. That's almost unheard of to be a non-nurse joining a team, and for somebody to have, in my opinion, a very proper perspective on how a team should look. So, I mean, you were well supported. Obviously, you were asked to come into that role. But how did the rest of the hospital receive you being a non-nurse, kind of in the infection prevention profession?
Yes, I think that, I had the team that I was with was so well respected. It was just a time and a place where I was. Our infectious disease physician was a member of HICPAC. He was writing national guidelines. He knew the science. He was in that. And so they had a very high functioning team, and they wanted science, and they knew what they wanted. That's how this all happened. Because I was with the person who'd been in infection control for years. She was highly respected in the hospital, and the infectious disease physician, who was our medical director, he was highly respected in the hospital. So that really is what made all the difference. We were very connected to the CDC. We went to the CDC as a team. I had such opportunities to train. Back in 1992, the CDC would fly us for training in NIS when I was learning how to do NIS and infection control. There was support to get the hospitals up and running in this country with science-based, evidence-based programs. I just was fortunate to be at a hospital when this all happened, at that hospital.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, so you stayed in that role, looks like, for 13 years. Is that correct?
As the infection preventionist there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I stayed, right. So I stayed, boy, it's hard to know how many years I actually stayed there because I was at that hospital as a microbiologist and then an infection preventionist for 20 years. So a
Gotcha.
total of 20 years for those two careers. And then I left to actually move to Northern California. I wanted to come back to Northern California.
Gotcha.
And when I moved back to Northern California, I just same kind of thing. What can I say? Got lucky, and walked into a hospital that was located where I wanted to work. Literally, was located where I wanted to work. I had no idea that they were so connected with national policy, and they had a platform and a following. And when they found out it was me, because I had when I was in Southern California, done a study. In 2006, I published a study. And so when I came to Northern California, they knew who I was. They had read my paper. And so they're like, wow. And they started to promote me into more professional roles. They needed me to be a leader. So I did not go there knowing that would happen. I went there because the hospital was located in San Francisco and I wanted to work in San Francisco.
Yeah. No, that's great. Can you go in? Just for talking to folks, it's rare to walk into the support system that you had. And it seems like not only did you have a strong support system, but you actually had people that knew what they were doing in addition to that. So can you just speak to how important and how, monumental really that was for you in your career? And then how or if you try to do that now for other people?
Absolutely. I really feel like, and I can tell you my mentors, I still am friends with my mentors, and we talk about this all the time, that they gave me what I needed to have the confidence to make decisions using the evidence. That it was they that set me up for that. They're very proud of me, of how far I've taken the career. They feel like they backed the right horse, because I have really taken it. And like they said, they're still very proud of me. It's lovely. Of how that all worked out. And we had very different personalities. I think that was really the interesting thing. So they taught me structure, they taught me science, they taught me to critically think, and go deeper, okay, and ask more questions. And it was the curiosity and the way we approached everything. And yes, it was back in the day where we would discuss a hospital-acquired infection and discuss whether we really thought it met infection. Okay. And that was my infectious disease physician sitting down with me and going over cases with me. I do not think most infection preventionists have an epidemiologist, medical director who does that, who takes responsibility for the data. And that is huge for me. I always am looking for programs where we have an infectious disease medical director who really wants to get involved and make sure the data is really good and understands the data, okay, and understands whether there was something we could have done to prevent that infection. And that's what I was getting in San Diego. So I was trained on how to be very methodical about what I did. And I was trained to use science. And I definitely, that is when I mentor now, that is what I do. When I find infection preventionists I'm working with who don't know how to have the conversation with their medical director and how to engage their medical director, because every program, at least in California, has a medical director. But how often do they meet with that medical director? How often do they discuss the cases? It's very different. And so we don't want to waste these people's time. These people are physicians. They're busy. So we need to have meaningful conversation if we're going to take their time. And so learning how to be prepared for the conversation with them so you can really have a hard-hitting session with them, and then they can get back to work, because we know they wear many hats. They're clinicians as well as our administrator.
And let me ask a follow-up. It's kind of the reverse of what kind of your role is now, but if you were talking to somebody that was looking for a job in infection prevention, whether it's first time or maybe it's second time, but somebody that really craved mentorship and just needed that support, do you have any advice or maybe like questions that you would say that they should ask in the interview, or anything they should look for or observe before they accept a job if they really need that support?
Right. So I would say at this point, the best thing to do is to go out on the APIC website. On the APIC website, there is the APIC model that is posted up there of what the profession looks like. Okay, and it's a circle, and it's divided up into like 5 or 6 different divisions, and underneath it lists what we are responsible for and what we're expected to know and to do. It is incredibly robust. And I think that most people do not know that that exists. And they do not, they think that they don't. I've had people over the years, nurses say to me, my back hurts, I can't lift patients anymore. I think I want to be an infection preventionist. Literally, I've had people who just thought we sit at our desk and maybe eat bonbons. I don't know. I've asked most of the time when I interview people, the first thing I ask them is, do you know anybody who is an infection preventionist? Do you know what anybody tell me tell me what you know about the career. Okay, because I just think people have this idea that everybody who's at the quality level in the hospital is just sitting at their desk counting widgets, and they just don't want to be at the bedside anymore, or they don't want difficult conversations. And I'm like, oh, there's going to be a lot of difficult conversations. This is not what this career is about. There's a lot of skill and people skills involved in making change. We do not just count. We used to just count, and that's what's changed since I started 32 years ago. Our job was to count infections, but our job is not to just count infections anymore. And that's where the big change has been. So I tell people, go on the APIC website. There's also a nice APIC mentoring novice. It's called the novice, list, and it lists everything and a time frame for when you should be able to accomplish these things. The novice training model, same thing, super comprehensive. So people should understand everything on that list is something that we will be responsible for or working with. And I think what's important is that people need to understand that there's a full range of issues that we get brought into. And I would say the biggest shock to me was that pretty much infection control has to do with everything in the hospital. Once you become an infection preventionist, you realize there is not a corner of the hospital you don't need to get to know because somebody's going to call you from there. And there is infection prevention ramifications for just about anything we do in the hospital. And I can say that people ask me, my friends and lay people ask me what I do, and I literally say everything in the hospital potentially puts a patient at risk for infection. I never knew that.
Yeah.
And I don't need to be a subject matter expert in every department. I need to lean on my subject matter experts. And that's something I think is a pitfall for many new IPs. They think because they're the infection preventionists, they need to know all of the guidelines for endoscopy, all the guidelines for hemodialysis, all the guidelines. And I say, no, you need to know who your subject matter experts are. They need to know their own guidelines. Okay, they need to be the ones who know the guidelines. They need to bring those to the task force and to the committee meetings and such.
Wow. So, and you've hinted at this, there's obviously been a lot of changes over the last 30 years that you've worked in the industry, but going back to your first job, what was, and I don't mean to be repetitive on this, but what were the big surprises when you first walked into your first role? And like I said, we'll get to how it's changed since then, but do you remember kind of walking in and being like, oh, I didn't know I signed up for that?
Oh, I remember. I'll tell you, the scariest thing for me was probably in my first month or so, we needed to do a safety fair. We needed to get up on a stage because all of our employees needed to come for their annual training. That scared me so badly. I had never really done public speaking in those kind of large rooms. I always loved giving speeches when I was a kid or in school to a classroom of people, but getting up in front of a large group of people was really, really difficult for me. So I remember very early on just thinking, how am I going to have my knees not knocking, and how am I not going to be nervous in front of this crowd? That was the biggest thing for me to get over. The other thing was, which was really good for me, and I just want to say, if you coming into the field from a non-nursing background, I think was a real advantage. Truthfully, I think it was a real advantage because when I would meet with nurses to go over a process or a policy, I literally did not know what they did. So I could literally be ignorant and curious and say, I've never inserted a Foley. I've never done any of this care. I don't know. Can you show me? Can you explain to me? If I'm going to write a procedure, a policy, or something to help us do performance improvement, great. I'm not a nurse. So I think it was really helpful for me to not get ahead of myself. I see a lot of nurses go, oh, I can write this because I was a nurse. Well, maybe that's not how it works. So what I really think was people would think it wasn't a strong suit. I tell people all the time, because I am bringing many microbiologists into this field right now, and I am bringing MPHs into the field. And what I say to them is you can literally be curious and be honestly curious and listen to what they say. Have them show you how they do something, and then have the discussion of what we need to achieve from the infection prevention evidence. But they can show you, and that has just been a strong suit, really a strong suit for me. I have found in a few of the facilities I've worked in where I've gone to the chief nursing officer in that hospital when I was new, and I have said, what I really need is to have a team of bedside nurses, not managers, bedside nurses, who will meet with me once a month for an hour, and we will write this program together. And same thing, was lucky enough to find a CNO who liked my confidence, knew I wasn't going to waste anybody's time, and gave me bedside nurses, one from each unit, and met for 1 hour once a month. And we literally together designed what would work as on their unit. I would get the feedback, will this work on your unit? Well, maybe this works on the 7th floor, but does this work on the 9th floor? The culture's different, the patient population's a little different. It was amazing that I got that opportunity. And it was such useful time. And we were able to put a lot of things into pilot programs and try them based on what the nurses told me that would work on their unit. And it's really rewarding. I can walk into that hospital today and things are still being done like that. I just get a smile on my face that people said that wouldn't last. It wasn't sustainable. And I'm known for boots on the ground. I design things that will really be sustainable. And I'm very boots on the ground. Like, let's do something that's reasonable that you guys want to do so it is sustainable.
That's awesome. And I'm curious too, now, that's a two-part question, but you spent 20 years there. Then you go to a new hospital system and a new location. I want to know, how much different was it? From the recruiting end, obviously that's my background. Whenever somebody's been at the same place for a long period of time, it is often a very difficult transition. A lot of times to the point to where it ends up they end up not getting an offer, or that it just doesn't go well. So I want to know your experience staying at one place for a while, then going into a new program. One, how much different was that? And was that a shock to you? And then secondly, obviously you had a ton of support in your last health system, even though you were not a nurse, and that was pretty uncommon at the time. Was that still the case at the new hospital, or did you have any sort of backlash on that or challenge on that?
Right. No, I was hired by then. I'd had so much experience compared to other people. There just weren't very many trained infection preventionists. So my microbiology background at that point didn't matter. I knew what I was talking about. When I would interview, I could explain to them what I'd been doing and what my point of view was, and how I stuck with the evidence-based guidelines. I was into putting bundles in place. They could see the structure that I came with. Never did anybody ever care again once I was in the role. And that's really what it is you need to, once you're an infection preventionist and you've got something to speak about of what you've accomplished, it did not matter any longer. that I wasn't. Now, what I found, and I've been, in many hospitals since then. I've worked in a number of hospitals where I've walked in. So in the last 5 years, that's what I've been doing. So I've gone to a lot of hospitals. I've worked in a lot of hospitals. What you find is the C-suite is very different, and the leaders are very different. And I walked into some places where science did not matter. My science, they weren't interested in my science. It was what they wanted me to do was stuff were things that I didn't agree with. From a science background, I couldn't support that, and I didn't want to put my professional reputation on the line any longer. So what you find between facilities is who you report to is a big thing. That's what I find is so inconsistent. You can report to quality directors who have a background and understand infection prevention, or quality directors who think infection prevention is do what we did 30 years ago, because they come from their background is, well, that's what they did 30 years ago. People report to the chief of nursing, and then you're just working on nursing, but you've got all these other support departments that aren't being handled. For me, what's most important, and I've, finding, is somebody who is the quality director who really understands the role of an infection preventionist and what a good infection preventionist looks like. And I can tell you that I have had wonderful wonderful quality directors who put me to the test, and they warned me they were putting me to the test. They said, sorry, but I need to prove that you really know what you're doing, because I've been burned so many times by trusting my infection preventionist who sold me up the river. Literally, I have been told that a few times I'm hiring you because the last person sold us up the river. Wow. So they could see that they said, I need someone who knows their stuff. And they could see from my background that I knew my stuff. And that's how it's very different in every hospital. There's a variety, and this is the biggest pitfall: who you report to and how much they respect the profession and your skills.
Wow. So go into your role now. What does that look like? I mean, it sounds like you're bouncing around different hospitals. You're doing some consulting. You're involved with hiring and mentoring and training. But if you could, and you don't have to be super specific on this, but if you could just explain what you've been doing the last several years.
So for the past 5 years, and it just so happened that it kind of coordinated at the same time that COVID hit. I was asked by my organization to go where I was needed. Okay, go wherever I was needed. And it was during COVID, and I walked into a number of facilities that had no infection preventionist at the time. And so I had to learn that hospital very quickly. Okay, and that is something that I really love doing. When you were saying, when you walk into a new hospital, and I'm always trying to train my new IPs that way, is that feeling of walking into a new hospital. Where do I start? Where do I start? Who do I get to know? Which departments do I go to? Who are the leaders? And so I started myself having to go out and figure out who are the key players, who are the movers and shakers, who are the ones who are going to help me get this program where I felt it needed to be. I am very big on being in the trenches. So I was trained by my folks in San Diego, and it always worked for me to get into the ICUs and just be there, be in the intensive care units. And if they're rounding as a team, round with the team and just listen. And so every hospital I started at, that's day one, I went to the ICU and I went to multidisciplinary rounds. I think it's number one, the most important thing. And that's what I tell my new trainees to do, to connect themselves and to be seen as part of the team. Just go. You don't have to have answers. You just have to listen. And you're trying to figure out the acuity of the facility, like what's going on here? What kind of patients do we have? You're trying to listen to the conversation between the physicians and the nurses. You're trying to look at the things about performance improvement. And are we discussing as a team? There's the pharmacist there. Is everybody connecting and doing what's right for the best for this patient? You're listening for them calling out their, whether the patient's got a Foley and how many days it's been in, or whether they've got a line. You listen to what's going on, and you listen. You don't go in and start fixing things based on what you've read or what the person before you did. And that's one of the things I remind people, just because it was done before you, and that's what was always done by the infection preventionists before you, you need to sunset some of these things that are not bang for the buck. And so go out and listen and watch, and don't police people. Now, I know a lot of people think that that's what infection prevention is. They're the police. And if that's people's attitude, I don't want them in the role. What you need to do is listen and watch. Now, unless something is really putting a patient at risk at that moment and you need to step in, do not walk in your first month and correct anybody. You don't even know what they were trained to do. You have no idea whether they ever were trained. We have a lot of people who started working in healthcare during COVID, and they just came in. We needed people. We did not onboard. We do not expect that they know the policies. And so I really say you need to do a familiarization tour when you start for at least a month when you walk into a new hospital. This is what I did for a number of years, and this is what I learned was the most successful thing, was to walk around, listen, and introduce yourself and say that you're here for support. If people have questions and if you can't answer them, you write them down in a little notebook. You just keep a little notebook. The other thing I say to people, if you're a new IP, never carry a clipboard or a notebook with you. You look like an auditor. You do not look like a cheerleader. I want IPs to be seen as cheerleaders. We're change agents, but we need to work with people. So literally everybody I would on board for the last 5 years, I'd bring them a little 3x5 cute little notepad or sticky notes and say, put this in your pocket. That's all you can carry. A pen and a sticky note. You need to look non-threatening. You're not taking names. You're not writing down things. But you certainly can watch what goes on. And when you get into the elevator, you can jot something down so you don't forget before you get back to your office. But don't look like an auditor. Nobody will like you and want to team up with you to do performance improvement. And you are ultimately there to build performance improvement teams.
Well, I've never heard that before. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that most of my new IPs, when I was putting together a formal curriculum now for how to train and onboard, I put these things. I asked my former trainees, and they said that was one of the best things you ever taught us. Don't carry a clipboard or a notebook. Change the way people look at their infection preventionist. Think of yourself as a cheerleader. And when you're out rounding and you see something, you should note it to yourself so that you know what you need to do in your next education session. How do you know what needs to be done? How do you know where your risk is? Observe it with your eyes. Watch, practice, listen to the questions that get asked. How do you build your program for the next year? What are people still questioning? What are people still not doing? And what I always say is before you start policing people, go find what the policy is. Go look at what the current policy is. And number one, find out, has anybody ever been trained on it? And number two, can your staff actually find that policy? Can they actually look it up? Because most policies are just pieces of paper that people have on file for surveyors. They don't teach to them. But I think our policies are the basis of our education. We need to make sure our policies really match practice and are practical. And so this is how, when you're saying, this is how I bring my new IPs on. I literally start there. Watch what goes on, then go grab a policy and see whether the policy and practice actually match. And if not, go back and work with that department or all of nursing on how do we have make a policy that actually will work? How do we write it for 2024? And then we educate on it. It's not just a piece of paper in a file. We use it to train people.
Wow. And you've you've hired a bunch of people, you've trained a bunch of people. By this point, I think that you've probably got a pretty good idea of the makeup of a very good infection prevention professional. Could you go into maybe the traits that you look for that that are just necessary for the role today?
Sure. So as I said, I asked them what they know about the role. Okay. I asked them their motivation of wanting to be an infection preventionist. What is it about the profession that appeals to them from what they know? My number one question is, give me an example of how you have used your curiosity in your life. It does not have to be professionally. It can be anything. Give me an example of your curiosity. I need to hear how curious you are and how you were deep diving and researching and just, that kind of a mentality. And I've had people bring up all different kinds of things. It's been fabulous to show me that they're curious people, that they understand that's what they need to do. The other question is, I ask them, how do you feel about not knowing an answer? If you get asked a question and you're in over your head and you don't know the answer, what's your response to that individual? Are you going to punt and make up something to look smart? Or are you able to say, I don't know that answer, but I will get back to you? So how comfortable are you with not having the answer? Whatever you did professionally before you became an infection preventionist, you have a background. But that does not mean you're going to have an answer to the question for a very long time. This field is very complex, and there are many ways to use your words to instill confidence, and to make people understand that you will go find the information, because that's your job. You are a resource. Okay, you're a resource. You have to have the facts. So if somebody asks for something, you need to feel comfortable going back and closing the loop, not just being the smartest guy in the room at the time. And the next thing is issues to tell me about difficult conversations you've had and how you've dealt with just difficult interpersonal issues that have come up at work. What's your style? What's your style? And then how do you see yourself getting to know what's going on in the hospital? Yeah. What would that look like for you? So those are the things that I'm really, really interested in, but curiosity, and feeling like they're a curious person, because what we do, we have to constantly research. Things change all the time. As you can imagine, I get asked a question, I have to say, let me get back to you. CDC has changed that recently. I think something's changed. The rules constantly are changing. The science is changing, and I do not want to misquote it, because I don't want to lose them and lose their respect.
Where do you find, I guess, where are infection preventionists lacking right now? I mean, where do you consistently see the biggest hole in knowledge or experience? Or
yes, so I feel that infection preventionists get hired. I've spoken to a number of them, no training whatsoever. Okay, and I've said to them, on Friday you were a nurse at that hospital, and Monday you're suddenly the infection preventionist. How does that work, and how does that feel? If that's how do people respect somebody who does that? That is a big issue. And so trying to find somebody who comes from another organization, many times that's going to be much more successful as an infection preventionist. So it is true that I may train somebody from scratch and then they go someplace else, because now when they go someplace else, they go with the title of infection prevention and they're looked at as an infection preventionist. But it's very hard on Friday to be a nurse and Monday to be an infection preventionist at your hospital and to be taken seriously. So you have to be very self-deprecating and go around and introduce yourself in your new role, that I'm working on it. I'm new, and obviously I can't do that over the weekend. So ask me questions so that I can go back and research them and I can learn how to do that. Okay. So anybody who came in from that world just needs to go back and go out in the trenches, and it's scary, but go out in the trenches and have people ask you and you say, I'll get back to you, and then go look it up and then use guidelines, use science. So I would say that in my profession in the last 5 years, from my role in the last 5 years, I've been trying to expand the pool of who I think has the right skill set to be an infection preventionist. And obviously, if I get an application for somebody who's a microbiologist, I will certainly call that person up and have a conversation with them, because that is my resume. And I understand what it's like to be a microbiologist who wants more than just the bench and has this interest, and also the science background. I like the scientist background. I like to step back and look up the evidence. And that's why, so I have been lucky enough to onboard probably 5 microbiologists into infection prevention roles, and it's great. And people didn't think of us that way because they don't know our training. They don't know our background. Most people don't know how we were trained to be infection preventionists and responsibilities to make decisions that a microbiologist has to make. There is a lot of professional responsibility when you're a microbiologist, because you are really helping with the diagnosis. And you have to make calls, and you have to be a critical thinker to make a good call and give that information to a physician. If you think there's something important there, it can make or break a diagnosis. I was lucky enough to have those experiences as a microbiologist where I was thanked by physicians for finding the diagnosis of their patients. Most people do not know that that's what a microbiologist is. We're behind the physician making the diagnosis in many cases if it's an infectious disease. So I had those wins, and so I knew how to do that. So the microbiologists, I go for them, but I'm looking for somebody with the right personality, because many people who work in labs don't want to go out and talk to people and have difficult conversations and use their words and be challenged. Because they like being in the lab. No one talks back to them. They just do their work and go home. It's too much heat up on the floors. So I understand that. My MPHs is where I started going, looking for Masters of Public Health students. And that came from a girlfriend of mine who had gone to college with me, was teaching at the University of California, and they were having a careers night, career cafe. And she said, Wendy, will you come share your career with these MPH students? So I sat at a table, and they knew what my resume was. And I had a very earnest graduate student come to me with a resume and said, I want to be an infection preventionist. I was shocked she knew what we actually did, but she was my first. And she was so passionate and knew what she wanted. And I said, come spend some time with me at the hospital. And she was my first. And it was funny because she was there during Ebola. And wow, that was a run during Ebola. Yeah. So anyway, that's how I started with getting MPHs in. I found very bright people who were very good critical thinkers, very good at coming up with new ways of looking at things. That's their specialty in getting a master's in public health, strategic planning. How could we do this more? We could do this more efficiently. And I could hear the conversations, and I'm like, this is what we need in this field. I need more people who see it differently and want to make changes in process and be more efficient. And so I started down that path, and it led me to, now I've probably taken 6 MPHs and turned them into infection preventionists.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you mentioned very early on that the original job, when you first get into infection prevention, it was more just counting infections. Obviously, infection prevention has progressed a whole lot, and there's probably a whole lot more that it needs to go. But also imagine there's a bunch being thrown onto your plate that's probably shouldn't be thrown onto your plate. But yeah, I just want you to speak a little bit to kind of how far we've come, like to this point, and then where you feel like the industry really should go and where it shouldn't as well.
So back in the 90s, when we used to just count widgets, count infections, and teach hand washing and do the basics of what infection prevention used to do, my team and I would constantly ask our boss for more time to be able to be up on the floors. We wanted to connect with people, see what was really going on, talk with people, and do performance improvement. We never called it performance improvement, but I remember asking for another body. Could we have another IP, even half time, so that we could get away from our desks and from policy writing and all that and get up on the floors and see what was really going on. And that was in the 90s. And it has taken a very long time, but after the 2000, the Institute of Medicine's reports, partnering for patients, and CMS coming in and saying, okay, we're going to pay you based on the outcomes, your outcomes. Suddenly, we were able to do performance improvement. So something I had been doing in the 90s with my team in San Diego was performance improvement, and changing practice. Suddenly we were supported to do it because literally money was involved from CMS and value-based purchasing. So when that all happened, I was able to jump in and start doing more performance improvement bundles, making it easier for people. My mantra: make it easier for them to do the right thing, and learning how to get into the hands of the clinicians what they needed so they could do the right thing and do right by the patient. So that's where the performance improvement started, was literally from the CMS value-based purchasing, that we really got support to do that. But what I've learned along the way is, besides performance improvement really being our responsibility, we need to be change agents, was the critical thinking skills and a risk assessment. And most people don't understand, but when the phone rings in the infection prevention office, 99% of the time the call is for our opinion. They want our recommendation. That's risk assessment. People think of risk assessment as, oh, there's a construction project coming, and so we have to do a risk assessment for that. There's my annual risk assessment plan for my whole program. I'm talking about risk assessment as a skill. When the health department calls and says you had a patient there last month who had TB and you didn't know it, my first role there is risk assessment. I got to figure out who may have been at risk to get TB. Everything we do is risk assessment. We have to weigh pros and cons. And this is something that many people shy away from. And I would tell every infection preventionist that if you're not able to do that, if that makes you nervous and you just don't want that type of responsibility, this is not the role for you. You do not have to answer immediately. What I tell my new IPs, you take the question down, you take the name of the caller and their phone number, you take a deep breath, you hang up, you tell them you'll get back to them. Never do I make a ruling in that moment. I always step back, take a deep breath, go slow, okay, and do my research. Figure out where the guideline is that pertains to that. And we've got so many guidelines. And people literally, I can tell you, I know our bosses do not realize how many guidelines are out there. Is it a state guideline? Is it OSHA? Is it CDC? Is it something the Joint Commission requires of us? We have to sit down and go, where does it live? Where's it written? Okay, it's on every level. I get this with laundry and laundering something from the NICU. And can I do this? And Wendy, is this allowed? I don't answer immediately. I make sure that I got the most current guideline. Okay, even with people asking about cardboard boxes, there is a reference for that. Go out and look for that reference of what's actually being said about cardboard boxes being up on units. Everything I look up, and I bring that piece of paper back. I bring the evidence with me. Now, I make a recommendation. I do not make a ruling. And everybody needs to, as an infection preventionist, understand that. We are consultants. Even though we work there, we make a recommendation based on the guidelines and the science and the current policies of your own hospital. So if someone asks me something, first thing I'm going to do is, what's our policy say? This policy was approved in a calmer moment when everybody was putting on their hats. But now we're nervous. Everybody's nervous, and they want me to, because of drama, change practice. And I'm like, let's go to our policy. And it's up to the C-suite. The C-suite's decision. It's the C-suite's decision whether we veer off policy or not. The policy is written to protect us. The policy is the policy. So they make the decision. I just bring it to them. And I also bring to them maybe something's updated. Maybe we want to modify that policy. But there's risk in everything and benefit. It comes down to animals in the hospital, okay? Policies like animals in the hospital and whether we allow them at end of life. Those are decisions that impact people's lives. So we have to decide whether there's risk or there's more benefit in everything we do. Every decision I've made, whether I've got alcohol gel in the hallway of my hospital, and whether the fire department says it's a fire hazard. And I say, well, is there a bigger risk of infection being transmitted or a fire in this hallway? I feel there's a bigger risk if people can't easily clean their hands that someone's going to get an infection. That's my recommendation to the locals. But everybody's like, oh, we can't do this. We heard this somewhere. I'm like, okay, let's talk about what risk we want to accept. So I just talk about the two things when you asked. It's performance improvement and how to lead a performance improvement team. Okay, how to do that with documents, with a plan, with written expectations of every team member. Performance improvement structured as an infection preventionist. You can do that. We do that. That's what I do. That's what I teach. How to feel comfortable leading a team to change something. That's a process that's not working for us. And then risk assessment and being comfortable making recommendations to your C-suite and let them make the ultimate decision, but you know what the references are and the resources are for making those decisions.
So what needs to change? If you're looking at the bird's eye view, I mean, what needs to change, or what scares you about maybe where things are headed?
Yeah. So what needs to change is that we really need formal training programs for infection preventionists. I've been trying to do this for years. I've been trying to get a curriculum embedded in Masters of Public Health programs. I went to one school in particular. It was kind of enlightening, how they did not really respect our profession and understand. I think we need bachelor level or master's level public health and nursing schools to offer a track in hospital infection prevention. I've worked with APIC over the years to write the curriculum. APIC does have a curriculum that I worked on to lay out what needs to be taught. But I really believe that this needs to be a track that people either get as an undergraduate or part of their master's. I see it as a master's in public health in infectious diseases, which we have now at a lot of schools. And that 1 year is classroom and has to do with epidemiology, and most of that coursework is already there. And the second year is internship in a hospital, so that when you finish, you're a confident infection preventionist. And this is where I see the future, what I would love to see in this country. It is such a complex profession. It's not understood. Even the universities that I spoke to did not understand, because you can be academic and theoretical. We need practical. But we need people who are trained in theory, understand why they're making these decisions. You need to understand the theory behind all of these, the transmission of diseases. And so I feel like that's where we need to go. But in the meantime, we need formal training. And when, I know from feedback I've gotten from people about the formal training, over the years, it's just been a checklist. We've onboarded infection preventionists, and I think 99% of the country, that's what they do. They got a checklist. Someone goes through that topic with somebody and checks them off. But do they ask them to demonstrate that they understand how to apply the concept? Is there an exercise that they can put in there for them to show me you actually understand how to apply the concept I just taught you? That is not happening. And that's what needs to change. It's not that hard, but somebody has to take the time to put together the exercises that they would want to demonstrate. For instance, like I said, you can put in their risk assessment and you can say patient comes into the hospital with these symptoms. Okay. And now this patient ends up having meningococcal meningitis. Okay. What do you do? What is the first step? Okay. Same thing with, you may have a bunch of patients who have surgical site infections after they've had laminectomy. Where do you start? Where do you start? And just ask them that. Tell me step one. Where are you going to look if you think maybe you've got a problem? That's what we don't ever do. We don't ever make sure they're competent before we let go of them. And competency has been a big issue for infection prevention in this country. Over the years, Joint Commission would always ask for, we need to see your IP's competency. And we'd say, well, there's nobody who can judge. We're the specialists. Nobody knows our field better than we do. How do we self-judge? I don't know how to do a competency. Okay. But over the years, we've done that. At my organization, we have very robust competencies I've worked on that exactly do that. Ask, what do you do step one? What do you do step two when you are presented with this scenario? What do you do and why? And that's what we need to do. More practical onboarding of making sure before we let somebody go that we didn't just tell them what chapter to read in the APIC text, but that we actually know how to apply, that they know how to apply the concept that we ask them to read about.
Now, and this will be my last question because we're bumping up on time here, but where does the certification in infection control come into play? Obviously they used to require 2 years of experience. Now I think it's just more of a recommendation. You're seeing more and more people get out of school with it. I guess, is it a good judge of competency or is it lacking? I guess, how important is it in your mind?
Yeah, in my opinion, it's not a good judge of competency. I think that's the real problem. Over the years, it has improved. I want to say that some of the questions are definitely more talking about process and what would you do first. I think that's really important. If I could change that exam, it would be, tell me the first thing you would do if presented with this situation. And there's more of those questions in there. But I know a lot of people who pass that exam, but still cannot function efficiently and effective, have conversations. That's just a test. But what are your conversations? If your critical conversations are not effective and you're not an effective change agent, the CIC means nothing. So a CIC is a step. It's a hoop. It does require you to study a lot of background. So I like it. It's like continuing education. It forces you to read up because while you're studying for the exam, you have to read up and understand. It forces us to get some type of a structure and read and learn more. But application, ultimately to me, as we've seen in every situation, if you can't apply the concepts, you can't have a conversation and be creative and come back for more. Many times you go out in the trench, you think you've got the right answer, you're going to have an easy conversation and you get pushback. You have to carefully use your words to not burn bridges, to deliver the message, to cut the conversation off and leave and go back to your office, regroup, and figure out how you're going to come back and make that happen. In another setting, you have to read the room, right? So there's a lot of reading the room that you're not going to get from the CIC exam, but it's a great study guide and it's a good start.
And you've hinted at this a few times, so I want to give you the chance to really kind of hone in on it and talk through it. But clearly, an infection prevention position, you've got to be able to have difficult conversations, even with people that are in positions that are above you, whether that's a physician or a medical director or someone in the C-suite. What's your, like I said, and you've hinted at it in different ways, but what do you tell IPs as far as how to approach that conversation?
I really tell IPs, you need to know your data. You need to know the science behind the change, and you need to know your own hospital's data. You need to not make changes or recommend based on something that's happening across town, what they're doing at another hospital. You really need to know your data through and through. So if you go to a mostly medical staff meeting, a medical committee meeting, you really need to know your data. You need to know that as far as which infections, why they were called an infection, what the definition is, be able to just be confident that the definition we're using is a surveillance definition. The clinicians have their clinical definition. You need to speak like that. You need to understand what an SIR is. If you don't understand the statistic that is being spewed in the room, you really look not very bright, okay? And not like somebody they trust. So you need to be able to explain what an SIR is, explain how the data was done, explain what the national guidelines, bring them with you to the meeting, the national guidelines, okay? Come prepared to meetings, okay? This is huge. If you're going to be invited to a meeting, you should only go to meetings where you have input or you're bringing something back. You should just not go to meetings because someone invites you to a meeting. That is not good use of your time. But you should come prepared. You should find out what the topic is, and you should know if there's a guideline from the CDC or somebody that pertains to this issue. Come with it. Okay, come with it. And then you can already talk confidently. That's, I think, what the issue is be prepared and know your stuff. And that's how you build the confidence of the C-suite and the medical leaders of your hospital, is to be able to really answer. And if you don't know the answer, say, I will get back to you. Let me look that up. I will find out what it was if you like what we did last year. But always know that if you're going to come with data, the first question is going to be, is this new? Have we always had this problem? You need to bring trends from over the last years. You need to be able to tell the story. I cannot tell you how many people have an infection prevention program and they have their meeting and it's a table of numbers. And I'm saying, tell the story. Use your words. Their eyes are going to glaze over when they see a table with all this data or a bunch of graphs. Don't do that. Okay? Tell the story of your data. Know the story of your hospital's data.
Okay. Now, like I said, we've hit time, so I want to let you go. But is there anything at all that I haven't asked, or any advice that you'd like to share, that just to make sure that we get out there to a group that's wanting to advance their careers?
Yeah, I think that you've really covered, most of it. I think it is people interested in the field need to know the depth and the range of what we need to know about. We need to know what our limitations are. We need to say no. And I think that's a really important thing I teach my new infection preventionists. If it's a department or a subject that you really can't contribute anything to, then learn to say, no, my time is really valuable. I have an infection prevention annual plan that is my roadmap for my program. I've written it based on what risks we have. I'm sticking to that. And I would just say that this is one of the hardest things. We want to be liked. We want everybody to think that we're, a team player. But we really need to go to our boss and say, I'm going to this meeting. I listened, and there's nothing that I contribute to that meeting, nor is there anything I'm going to bring back to somebody else. There are many topics like that sound like infection is involved, but you have no role as an infection preventionist, and you're just sitting in the room for an hour. So I just recommend you stop and ask yourself those questions, and that you use your time efficiently. Okay, not the easiest, but use your time efficiently, and always go back to your boss and say, I want to be efficient, and I want to use my infection control plan and meet my goals for the year. That's my priority.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Voice for Infection Prevention. We hope you found our discussions informative and insightful. Remember to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations with experts in the field, and don't forget to leave us a review to let us know what you think. For additional resources and to stay updated on the latest news in infection prevention, visit our website at voiceforip.com. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, stay safe and continue your commitment to excellence in infection prevention.